With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Welcome to a Friday morning in the UK. At the moment it's 7 after 6, so get up. You can sleep in tomorrow, maybe you can't. If you're like me, all throughout the week I want to sleep in. Saturday rocks along and there I am. I'm up early because I want to be. Anyway, I suppose that's human nature, isn't it? If you're in in Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, it's home time. It's 5:08, and in Queensland it's 4:08. And 1928 is that where we're at. Now I'm being quite rude about that, but we can't be rude because we're a very very sunny state. We have universities too, pineapples, all that sort of stuff. So leave us alone. Okay, the House Judiciary Committee Republicans issued an interim report compiling subpoenaed communications alleging the European Commission under Queen Ursula von der Leyen coerced social media platforms into censoring COVID-19 and vaccine content worldwide, affecting US users. Now, the report from 2022-2024, the targeting of anti-migrant views, populist rhetoric, and election-related content ahead of elections and social media platforms in countries such as the Netherlands, Romania and France, with platforms often complying to dodge massive fines. The EU calls the claims nonsense, but in the States, Republican Jim Jordan labelled it a threat to free speech, which it is. Dr. John Laughland is director of Forum for Democracy International and a lecturer in political science and history at the Catholic Institute of the Vendée in Western France. He was director of the Euroskeptic think tank European Foundation until 2008 and director of studies at the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation in Paris until 2018. He worked at the European Parliament from 2018 to 2020. Tell me, for more than a year, the committee has been warning that European censorship laws, this is the Judiciary Committee in the States, that they threaten US free speech online. Now, proof, big tech says censoring American speech in the US, including true information to comply with Europe's far-reaching Digital Services Act. What are your thoughts?
So this is, I'm very glad you've asked me on, because until this year, I used to give lectures in Paris University on democracy and the media. And funnily enough, my lectures were stopped and replaced by another much more neutral subject, because what I said was deemed to be too controversial by some of the students. And I'm therefore relishing the opportunity to now say it on a much bigger platform. Basically, this problem, which the US House of Representatives Judicial Committee has identified, is a very old problem. This is not new. I'm very pleased that they've put it in their report and that they've drawn attention to it. But it's been going on for at least a decade, as indeed they themselves say. And I expect you remember, Mike, and our viewers probably will too, that just after the Trump administration took office, so about basically a year ago, J.D. Vance went to Munich, to the Munich Security Conference, and gave a very strong speech, a very strongly worded speech, in which he accused Europe of stifling free speech. And this House committee report, this Judicial Committee report, is basically the continuation of that. The fact is that many of the things which the committee has identified, I also, and no doubt many others, identified some years ago. And in particular, for example, the thing that they point out, the most important thing they point out, is that the policing of speech, which is very, very proactive in Europe, is exclusively directed against, let's say, conservative or right-wing or skeptical opinion. And we can see this not only in the Digital Services Act, which is the legislative instrument, the hard power instrument that they use to force internet platforms, social networks to moderate their content in the desired direction. But we can see it also in the way that agencies within the European Union report on what they call disinformation. There's a thing called the European Media Digital Observatory, which has been reporting and monitoring media, particularly during election time. And this is, of course, what the committee report has picked up, and claiming to find examples of disinformation. Well, guess what? The disinformation is always the stuff you've mentioned. So anything that's skeptical about COVID, anything that's skeptical about immigration, any kind of what they call populist message, and so on. And this is the bias is absolutely blatant. In other words, basically what they are doing, to put it very simply, is leaning on these networks, on these social platforms, to prevent people from, for example, complaining about immigration or complaining about COVID restrictions or whatever. In other words, systematically to impose a politically correct, left of center, pro-European, pro-establishment speech. And this, once again, I can't emphasize enough how deep this is and how long it's been going on. The problem is that it's not just the European Commission that does this. Unfortunately, there's a whole network in Europe of national and, yes, European bodies doing this stuff. And when I talk about national bodies, I'm talking about the intelligence services, the security services, because they're up to it in their neck as well. I'm not sure I don't think the committee report goes into this angle of it, but national intelligence agencies, national security services, in Britain, for example, Britain's not in the EU anymore, but Britain is very similar. In the Netherlands, and I imagine in most of the other countries, they are involved in the policing of the internet. So to give you one example, during COVID, the head of the British Army, this was only a few weeks after Britain left the EU, so it was just continuing, if you like, as it had done before, and as I expect many other countries do too. The head of the British Army, back in April 2020, boasted about how his special operations, his psychological operations unit, Brigade 77, was basically not just policing, but also influencing the internet to remove what he called disinformation about COVID. In the Netherlands, a couple of years ago, the Dutch secret services described as a security threat any speech which tended to promote distrust in government. Can you believe it? So if you distrust the government, according to this AIVD report, which is the Dutch Secret Service, you are a security threat to the Dutch state. So this stuff has gone very, very, very deep indeed. And I'm obviously very pleased that the committee has found it and has obviously been working on it for a year. But I'm afraid we're a long way from getting out of it, because only on Tuesday, today's Friday, only on Tuesday in Paris, where I live, the French police raided the offices of X, of formerly Twitter. They've called in Elon Musk for questioning, and the head of X in France. And of course, the European Commission on the European level is trying to impose a 120 million euro fine on X. So unfortunately, they're going full steam ahead.
What would that be for, John, the $120 million fine? Would that
for
be
not doing what they want, which is to moderate speech in the direction that I've just described. That's what the Digital Services Act does. It claims its goal is to combat disinformation. That's the label that they put on it. And what they want these internet platforms to do, these social networks to do, is to proactively prevent or at least downgrade, shadow ban or whatever, certain kinds of speech. And that obviously depends on the algorithms. That's why the police raided the X offices on Tuesday, because they allege, their allegation is I'm sure I don't believe it for a minute, but what they will say is that X is promoting, that Elon Musk is promoting, this or that line of political debate on immigration or whatever, and they want him to do the opposite. They want him to take down stuff which doesn't fit the party line. And they did this, by the way, for years, long before Musk took over X. The whole Twitter files thing. When Musk bought X a couple of years ago, he published these famous Twitter files, which lots of people have worked on. What these files show, and this, by the way, is an important point, that the American government leaned for many years very, very heavily on Twitter to police its content. When I say very heavily, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of messages from the FBI going to Twitter every week, literally nearly 700 or 800 interventions by the American authorities every week. So a gigantic amount of government interference. And I think it's important to say for our viewers that this whole, what people have called the censorship industrial complex, which involves, yes, things like the Digital Services Act and the equivalent acts in America, but also a whole galaxy of NGOs, of disinformation centers in universities, and on and on and on. This censorship industrial complex was set up in 2016 by the Americans. It started in America. Now, the House Judicial Committee, of course, is writing about Europe, and maybe they've dismantled it in America. Certainly, Trump promised to do that. But the origins of this are American. The Europeans, of course, were very happy to follow. But the origins of it lie in an act which Obama passed in the last days of his office in December, the last days of his time in office in December 2016. So the election was in November 2016, which Trump won. He passed a Disinformation and Foreign Propaganda Act, which basically set up what then became this censorship industrial complex. Because when Trump was elected and when Brexit happened in June 2016, these people panicked and they thought, oh my God, the people are not voting as they're supposed to vote. They're voting against all the things we believe in. This is dangerous. This is a national security threat, and so on. And they set up this apparatus, which I repeat, includes the security services. So we have, a sort of KGB style situation where the security services are involved and where dissident discourse, I repeat, is regarded as a security threat. This, as I say, all started in America, but of course has indeed been implemented very energetically in Europe. And unlike in Europe, we haven't got an administration as they have in America, which is trying to undo it all.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the representative, senior politician. I can't. His name just escapes me at the moment. He was in Australia and had a joint press conference, and went through a whole bunch of things that that Australia would like to be more connected to Europe. Von der Leyen's coming out here to say some nice things, and not mean them, of course. And then we have one of our representatives, Penny Wong in Australia, said that we have the same values as Germany does, which worries the hell out of me, and especially around the mis and disinformation bit. And we know that Germany, along with a great part of Europe, is embracing free speech. No, it's not free speech. Should we be worried in Australia? Just as a bit of a sidebar here, do you think we should be worried in Australia with the coziness of us and Europe? Because Europe is no leader in most things that are good.
Well, I'm not familiar with the status of free speech in Australia, but I would have thought, yes, I think Australia should be very worried. Australia, after all, is deeply embedded in the famous Five Eyes, security arrangements, which it shares with Britain, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. So the security services of Australia, the intelligence services, are deeply embedded with the same ones who are at the origin of this, because I repeat, it's an American origin thing. And as we know from COVID, Australia was one of the most, the Australian regime was one of the most vicious, one of the most repressive, like Canada and like Britain, and of course, like many countries in Europe. So unfortunately, yes, I think Australia probably is a candidate for this kind of internet policing and this kind of censorship. I just can't. You know far better than me, Mike, how it actually works in your country.
It doesn't work.
I'm not informed about that, but yeah, I would have thought culturally, the whole sort of liberal consensus, the sort of left liberal, politically correct consensus, it seems to me, is probably prevalent in Australia, just as it is all over the, let's say, Western world, what we call the Western world.
Well, in Australia, we have this, it's the e-safety commissioner, and her job was to bring in this, any child 16 and under, you are not allowed to go onto any social media. You can't do it. And you're blocked and that sort of stuff. By the way, they all worked a way around it. So the parents helped.
Yeah, but they're trying to do that in France. It's exactly what they're trying to do in France.
Too, and Spain.
Yeah, but I mean, it's absolutely outrageous, because if you have to be over 15 or whatever to go onto the social networks, that means that you have to prove your identity when you go onto a social
That's
network.
right.
And that obviously means it's nothing to do with that being under 15. It means policing everybody who ever goes onto any social network, because their ID will be logged, and that what they watch or what they say on those networks will obviously be monitored. So I'm very upset to hear that that's true in Australia, although I'm not entirely surprised.
No, we're very closely tied with China, so we're embracing their free speech mantra at the same time, which has very little in many cases. Tell me, how do we break this desire from the EU and many other countries around the world to shut you up? And that, in fact, in New South Wales, in Australia, the Premier there, Chris Minns, who I lovingly refer to as Chairman Minns, has said that no one has any, unless you have permission or you're afforded to by the government, you are not allowed to have free speech. The government will decide what you can say and what you can't say, and that's what he said. I mean, that's deplorable. And if it's happening in Australia, I mean, we had a terrible record with COVID, of course, but it doesn't augur well for the rest of the world.
Yeah, but again, we know all this, Mike. I mean, we all remember Jacinda Ardern saying, "We will be your single source of truth." That's what the whole Digital Services Act is, that there are trusted sources of media. That's what they're setting up in Europe and in France and all over the place. So they will give a blue tick or whatever to basically government sources of information, government-approved sources of information. And we know, you and I know, I think I know, that government is the primary source of disinformation. We're just in Britain going through an absolutely psychedelic moment where the Epstein business is being blamed on Russia, which, you have to have such levels of cognitive dissonance to believe that one just basically despairs at humankind's critical faculties. You ask how to get out of it. You actually you've partly given the answer in your earlier question when you said that this is being done in Australia by a safety officer. What we have to do is attack the problem at its root, which is that this whole issue of free speech now for at least a decade, certainly in Europe, has been discussed in the context of security. We have to cut the root. We have to cut this problem at its root. Free speech is not a security threat. It is not a danger. It is not a problem to the state. It doesn't threaten the state if people say things that the government doesn't like. On the contrary, free speech and free inquiry and open discussion is the way to get to truth. That's how we learned things about COVID. That's how we found out that the vaccines didn't do all they were supposed to do and maybe did things they weren't supposed to do, etc., etc., etc. It's precisely by having, if you like, an apparently chaotic platform where people can more or less say what they want, that we get to the truth. It's a public good. It's absolutely not a threat, and certainly not a security threat. So we have to dismantle. And actually, before he took office, Trump gave a video, he did a series of short videos explaining what he was going to do once he took power, and he gave one about this very subject, standing between two American flags and saying, we're going to cut all federal funding to all these disinformation agencies and so on. So that's what I would do. I would start, first of all, by if I were in power, I would try to make sure that the security services have absolutely no role in free speech issues. That the whole notion that disinformation is a security threat is cancelled, is stopped, and of course, very importantly as well, that any financing to agencies, whether they're government agencies or whether they are ostensibly private, which happens all over the place because a lot of this stuff is outsourced to universities. There are disinformation analysis centers in hundreds of universities, but of course, really, they're just doing the government's work for them. That's the kind of funding that has to be simply cut. These things have to be closed down. So that's the way to go about it. Unfortunately, it requires a very high level of political will and lucidity about the problem.
And with the at least within Australia, and having lived in the US a little bit different than Australia, we spell Australia the same way you spell apathy, and then they go, how did that happen? Oh well, it's terrible, and all these terrible things are happening, and then they ask the question, how did that happen? I mean, it's because you took no notice of it. Look, we have run out of time, and I apologise for the hiccup at the start. So perhaps we can continue this maybe sometime next week, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Because I think it's an
important subject.
Yeah, and I think it deserves more than 15, 20 minutes. John, if somebody wants to find out more about you or the Forum for Democracy International, how do they do that?
Thank you. So Forum for Democracy is a Dutch political party, and indeed I run the international part of it. And we have a website, FVD, so V is because we've used the Dutch acronym FVD International, all one word, fvdinternational.com. And we also, of course, have an X feed, which is FVD_INTL, Forum for Democracy. Thank you very much for asking me to give that.
Yep, our pleasure. And being a Friday, I always ask my guests, what do you have planned for the weekend?
It's currently pouring with rain in the west of France. I'm going to go back to Paris later on today and possibly to our country house. We're lucky to have a country house on the banks of the Loire, about 2 hours from Paris. So I hope I'll go there. And
you'll have a glass of red, I would imagine.
Well, I may have red, but the white is also very famous. We live next to Sancerre, which maybe you've heard of. A lot of the wines, not in Australia, but in New Zealand, have been planted by wine growers from Sancerre.
If you hear a knock on the door, don't open it. It's me. John, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Mike. Okay.
This is The World Today.
We're today's news talk, The World Today.
And welcome back to The World Today. Nice background, by the way, for those who know music, which David Richards does. It's from Abbey Road, isn't it? I think it is. What a magnificent picture, and sort of brings back, I mean, I'm not that old, David is. He can recall those days. He's chortling in the background. Now, this week we spoke to UK-based Dr Clare Craig about the decline in medical ethics. Dr David Richards is an Australian physician, the best, scientist and systems theorist whose career bridges medicine, mathematics, and the study of complex adaptive systems. David is also co-founder of Australians for Science and Freedom and a general practitioner and, of course, an adjunct professor at an Australian university in the Faculty of Medicine. David, thanks for joining us. By the way, I've got to ask you this question. We had John Laughland on just before, and he's going to whiz down to his country home and sip some wine. You know that I like my whiskey. Which is better for you, by the way, whiskey or wine? I need to know from a man of your standing.
Well, wine is definitely superior, Mike. The French have great longevity. And the Scots, of course, are unfortunately one of the countries with one of the highest mortality rates from heart disease. And unfortunately, Scotch is not as good as a beautiful bottle of French wine.
Well, it was lovely chatting to you, David, and
Right, you
on
too, as
all
always.
those terrible, terrible news. I don't. Yeah, I believe you.
Yeah, I know, I know.
Look,
Just look, you got to have your treats. You got to have your treats, Mike. You know.
I think it's cleaner than wine. End up, I do. I end up sneezing after a few bottles, no, a few glasses of wine. After one glass, sometimes, especially red, whether it's the histamines. But I start sneezing, and I annoy everybody, including the cats. Can I? We talked about Dr. Clare Craig and her video, and she was reminiscing on what it was once like to be a doctor. And you had ethics, and nowadays ethics is not really part of the whole medical profession or agenda. What's your views on that?
Well, I don't think it's the doctors that are at fault. I think that Claire's a very smart lady. She's a very smart cookie, and I think there is a crisis in ethics, but I think that crisis has come about because of the structure that doctors now have to operate within. Let me go back a few years, Mike. One of the things that I remember from my early career, back in the Jurassic period, as it were, the hospitals were run by the matrons, and the matrons, or each ward had its own matron, and the matrons were absolutely fantastic. They kept a really tight ship. Everybody respected them, and they knew how to organize their departments. And then what happened? I was back in the NHS, back in the UK at the time. What happened was the matrons were replaced by managers, and that's when the rot started, because these managers came from industry. They had no concept of how to run medical services, and basically the standards. Everyone feared the matron. Not out of not out of the sense of they're bullying, but you respected their authority. But when the managers came over, they basically had no idea what was going on. And I know it's quite a privilege working in the health service back then, because much of my training was done face to face with some of the great specialists in London at the time who had, worked on the post-war period, had enormous experience in the field. And it was a great privilege to get a medical background in that way. But over the years, what's happened is that that face-to-face education has disappeared from the core curriculum. More and more of it comes now in the university classroom, and there's no substitute for learning on the job, as it were, from people who have got vast experience. People who are operating in universities, may be very well versed in their subjects, but they don't have the hands-on skills that are required to operate effectively as a doctor. And of course, they borrow very heavily from what's termed the evidence-based medicine approach. Now, evidence-based medicine sounds wonderful, doesn't it? It sounds like a great idea. But unfortunately, the evidence comes largely from drug companies, because drug companies are the ones who can afford to do studies expensive enough, have the money to do the studies that demanded these days to procure the evidence. And so much of the information comes from drug companies. It's biased, and what we've seen is an erosion of independence as far as the doctors are concerned, in terms of the way that they operate, and they're having to follow these guidelines, which are basically a one-fits-all kind of guideline. So you don't treat the picture in front of you. You follow a manuscript. I mean, to be perfectly frank, it diminishes the doctor to the role of a technician. And that's got worse in the last decade because of the implementation of AI systems within the health sector, and this has led to an absolute disaster because the problem is that AI, as it operates in the healthcare system today, is optimized for what's termed resource allocation. That's just a euphemism for cost cutting, basically. And every year, the system has to save more money, and as a result of that, more and more things get cut from the budget, with the result that basically things that should be done and were operationally essential are now being marginalized more and more, and as a result, that quality of care is diminishing. And a very simple fix to this would be for AI to be optimized instead of resource allocation or cost cutting, if it was re-optimized for uh, health optimization, for patient outcome. And even though the initial costs might be higher, in the long term, there would be genuine savings because it would lead to increased health standards all around, and increased productivity. And I've done the analysis on this, as you say. I'm a systems analyst in that sense, and it shows that if you optimize AI to optimization of health, then the rewards follow. And so, while I see where Claire is coming from, and I respect her point of view. She's a very intelligent individual. At the same time, I think sometimes there's a blurring of what's actually going on because, in that sense, there are constraints on the way doctors can operate, and that in turn can translate through to an appearance of a lack of ethics. However, I feel that most people who go into healthcare, most people who want to be doctors, majority of them genuinely want to do it because they want to do some good, And I think that they're trapped in a system, it's not of their own making.
I'm just thinking though, and I'm not doubting that probably the vast majority of these the students and the people who want to be doctors, they have the right intentions at heart. But what about the administration? And they're the ones and so we're talking about, I mean, if you look at APRA, for example, I mean, I'm going to put you in the have your foot dangling in acid or the volcano at the moment. I'll spare you that pain. But
Very thoughtful, right?
they're an indication of an organisation or a directive from a government or a government-related body on how doctors should act. And if you look at COVID and stuff, I mean, the doctor had many of their responsibilities, and their decision makings were just erased. And it was, as you said, there's almost like a one size fits all. How do we fix it? And let's not look at the individuals. Let's look at the organisations that determine how you operate.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, Mike. Exactly what you said is absolutely true. These organizations are self-serving organizations, so they're given a budget from government to prosecute their mandates, and of course, at the end of the day, what their funding depends on is reporting to government. So what's optimized is not patient welfare or citizen welfare, but what's optimized is the survival of the organization, and we've seen that in APRA and other organizations, other bureaucracies, and these are self-serving systems that basically become erosive over time and take away freedom of speech, take away the debate. At the end of the day, medicine is scientifically based, and science depends upon discussion and argument. And we're going to have difference of opinion. It doesn't mean that I'm right or the next person's right, but the only way we can improve what we do is by having a frank and open discussion about that. And that's something I've experienced in my medical forums throughout my career. Some of the decisions, some of the medical people can be quite terse. They can be very, very challenging, and that's how we operated. And now, of course, we've got this politically correct system coming in and being imposed upon us, where nothing can be discussed, nothing can be debated, and it is a malignancy that's creating enormous damage to healthcare in this country, not just to healthcare, but to the trust that the patients have in their doctors, because they realize, I think patients are waking up to the fact that doctors are becoming less and less free agents, because they are controlled by these organizations. Having said that, there is light on the horizon, because Understeiner, I think Understeiner's name, the CEO of APRA, has just come out recently acknowledging the harm that's been done by APRA, and saying that things have to change. That was a dramatic statement, a big statement, and we'll see how this pans out. But last year as well, the Complexity Commission reported on the operations of APRA and other regulatory organizations, and they were damning in terms of the way that these organizations are operating. So what you're saying is absolutely true. It's a major, major problem for Australia, and unless it's addressed adroitly, then patient welfare is going to suffer. But I do sense that we are turning a corner.
Interesting that Bill Gates was out here. I'm not too sure if he's gone back now. And one of the things that came out before he got here, that he contacted a disease from a Russian hooker, basically. But anyway, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy, umpire and everything. But anyway, he was saying that to Albanese, who's going, yes, 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 nodding his head like those little bobbing dogs on dashboards. Yes, 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 yes. And he was saying, yes, yes. Sorry, I've stopped that bit. He was inviting Albanese to agree with him to that, and he did, yes, yes, about putting all these surveillance cameras everywhere for the next pandemic, because what we're going to do, we're going to make sure we can see everything that is happening. So under the guise of, Nurse Gates, anyway, he's now advising on medical in some ways in Australia. But we're going to have, and because you're a co-founder of Australians for Science and Freedom, this must have rung some big bells for you. The thought of Bill Gates telling Anthony Albanese, yes, 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 that we need more surveillance, more cameras for the next pandemic. What's your views on that? First of all, is the next pandemic predetermined already?
Well, good question. Well, we all know that Bill Gates knows everything about everything.
He does, right? Hookers and everything.
He does. There is nothing that man doesn't know. It's just that the rest of the world doesn't follow what he thinks should happen. But that's the problem. No, it's interesting. I did an analysis. My deductive entropy program, as you know, which is the best predictive algorithm in the world. I'll make a little plug there, Mike. Looked at what were the biggest threats to future to survival for the human race, and it came up with not pandemics. It came up with engineered pandemics as the biggest threat to human survival. And look, I think my background is immunology and human genetics. That was my degree, and I think that there's been a lot of misinformation about the threat of global pandemics. I mean, basically, when we look back at any of those pandemics, even the so-called COVID pandemic, if we accept the absolute narrative from Bill Gates and from the World Health Organization that the global pandemic was a disaster for humanity, well, the truth of the matter is that 99% of people under the age of 65 survived the so-called pandemic, and the reality is that for any infectious disease, it relies on the vast majority of the people affected by the infection surviving the infection. Otherwise, it cannot spread. And so the idea that some virus is going to come along and wipe out the human race, well, humans have been going on for quite a few thousand years so far
Yeah.
without healthcare, without modern interventions, and here we are, we're still here. So the science says that the probability that a major global pandemic is going to come out and wipe out human civilization. This has come from Bill Gates's narratives and so forth. And I think that people who are very experienced in public health, like Jay Bhattacharya and so forth, they're perfectly aware that these kind of scenarios are more scripted from Hollywood than they are from the annals of scientific literature. So it is deeply concerning. And of course, recently I went down to Canberra as part of the Australians for Science and Freedom to campaign against the implementation of the World Health Organization directive, which the new pandemic, the International Health Agreement, which we signed up for, and basically, this means that the WHO can announce a pandemic whenever they want to, whenever they see it appropriate. Of course, let's face it, the WHO have not had a good track record on this point. These decisions are going to be made in Switzerland at the WHO headquarters, and if the WHO says there is a pandemic, well, there is a pandemic, and as a result of that, Australia has to fall in line and follow the directives. And this is going to cost us. This is going to cost the Australian taxpayers about $5 billion a year, which is substantial. And the costs for this are going to come out of monies that would otherwise gone to the prevention of heart disease and cancer. So each taxpayer is paying the WHO now. So is going to be paying the WHO somewhere between $5 and $6 billion a year, or I say all taxpayers, I should say, and that's going to come from taxpayers' money, and very lucrative for the WHO. But what does it really do for the average Australian?
Well, it makes us even poorer. But I see that the federal government is selling off all these military bases, hope to raise $2 billion. Not a whole lot. And when you're having to sell military bases, it says that the government really is running out of money. Just quickly, because you're going to hang around, by the way, we believe, thank you so much for that, for the protagonist.
Okay.
Some people have said that maybe it's the procrastinators. I'm not too sure about that one. And I'm very disappointed, by the way, that you slurred Scotch. I mean, it's just very... Normally after we drink it, we slur, but you did it prior. Look, just quickly, I need to get off that because I will get into trouble, and you're one of those that get me into trouble, let me tell you. The Nipah virus, is that going to be, because I mean, I was watching the thread, and it's similar to what they did with COVID, little stories here and there. Then the fear of mortality popped in, and it was 75% fatality rate. The Asian, all the Asian airports and stuff, they had screenings again for the Nipah virus. You've got about a minute to fill us in to tell me that I will live a bit longer to enjoy my Scotch, and I won't be eradicated by the Nipah virus.
Well, yeah, any disease which has a mortality rate at that level is going to not propagate very quickly through populations. Basically, I mean, one of the most successful, if you like, if we use that term, diseases globally in terms of infectious diseases is malaria. And the effect and the reason why malaria affects so many people is that only 1% of people who get malaria die, and so most people are carriers of malaria. And of course, when they carry malaria, they can carry the malaria to the next person. Now, if something kills the person quickly, then there's very little opportunity for transmission, and so the organism doesn't propagate through populations very quickly at all.
Okay. Now, quickly, if somebody wants to find out more about Australians for Science and Freedom or yourself, how do they do that?
Well, our organization, Australians for Science and Freedom, is a website, scienceandfreedom.org. We have annual meetings online if people want to join, and we have a presence on X, and we have a presence on Facebook as well. So we would welcome anyone to come along, and they'll be most welcome. And as far as I'm concerned, I've just published my new book, Mike, Deductive Entropy. Deductive entropy, it's if I say so myself, it's the best predictive algorithm in the world. If anybody wants to work out what's going on, that's the way to go.
We must get you on down the track, not too far down the track, and talk about it. Nothing like
Delighted.
a
Delighted.
Dr. David Richards, who will be hanging around for, because the accent, he knows a bit about the UK, and singing in Wales and that sort of stuff, and slurring Scotch, which is a terrible thing to do. David Richards, thank you very much. You'll be with us again after the news. This is The World Today.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome back to The World Today. I'm Mike Ryan. There's my guest getting ready. We're going to talk about some pretty serious stuff regarding Syria and the persecution and the obliteration of many. Hani Dweik is a Palestinian Jordanian specialist who specializes in communication and advocacy in the field of humanitarian and development sector. He's been living and working in the Middle East and North Africa and Europe, and is very knowledgeable about recent events in Syria and the high levels of violence and fear minority groups that they're all living under. I've got to welcome to our cameras Hani Dweik. Hani, thank you very much for joining us. Tell me, how serious, from what we're told in the West through legacy media, how serious or how distorted are the facts from what really is happening in Syria?
Well, thank you for hosting me. The thing is, what is happening in Syria cannot be taken out of context in the region. And what is happening around the world, the tensions between the US and other parts of the world. Now, what is happening in Syria is not something new. It's been going on for many decades. In terms of the country consists of so many ethnic groups, religious groups, and despite the atrocities committed by the previous regime, they managed somehow to keep it united under one entity, regardless of your ethnic or religious group. Now, of course, that doesn't take away the atrocities committed by this regime. But what happened is the alternative is not any better. And the thing is, what happened, and that was the shock, not just to me as a citizen of the region, but also for a lot of people around the world and in the region, is that to see someone who has been proven of committing atrocities and crimes against humanity, and who's been listed in the terrorist list, and all of a sudden, within 24 hours, he's a good guy and he's all right to work with, and that was a bit of a shock for everybody, not just minorities, but also people who were striving for freedom and liberty and diversity, because this person represent oppression, authoritarian ideology. So we are basically replacing a dictatorship with a religious dictatorship. It's not any better. So what happened is, of course, these religious minorities and sexual minorities and other types of minorities, they were fearing for their lives, their livelihoods, and there hasn't been any guarantee so far from the United Nations, European Union, or the United States to protect these minorities on the ground.
Can you? I was going to read you this from just a piece from Tommy Robinson. He says, "I'll reiterate: as the legacy media and politicians are pretending it's not happening, ISIS is back in Syria and committing unimaginable atrocities against minorities as before." I have to ask you, this mass violence, is it worse than it was under? Was it worse under Assad, or is it worse now?
Well, it's not a competition, to be quite honest. But the thing is, what's the use? I mean, the whole point of the revolution, or so-called revolution, back in 2011, is that people were going out of the streets, demanding for freedom, liberty, diversity, inclusion. None of these demands have been put in place now. So that put a question mark on what really happened. Is it just another chapter of dictatorship in the Middle East, or is it just a puppet, or is this person puppet that has been used by the United States and Israel, for that matter? So a lot of people who are non-religious, secular, believes in citizenship of the country, were are worried about what's going on, and there is no, unfortunately, there is no light at the end of the tunnel so far. So it's been only talk, 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 but nothing on the ground happening.
What does the re-emergence of ISIS mean for Syria?
I do believe that ISIS is just a tool. It's just basically it has been. I mean, if you look at the trends since ever it started back in the early 2000s, it has been a tool that's been used by a lot of countries, regionally and globally, to push on an agenda. I mean, I'm not talking here about a conspiracy theory. I'm talking about facts on the ground. I mean, Giuliani, he was ISIS. Now, how come he's on the top of the government in Syria, going to the White House, being being hosted by European countries and elsewhere, and your thinking is like, right? I mean, what is the use of international law? What is the use of ICJ, or all these entities that are put in place to serve justice? Means nothing. I mean, and we saw that with the Gaza-Israeli war. What is happening in Syria is all these has been used as tools to benefit in one way or another, one country or another. So again, it's I don't believe that ISIS works in a vacuum. I think ISIS is linked to a lot of countries around the world. They have been used in Iraq, they have been used in Syria and elsewhere. It's just a tool to frighten people. It's like, oh, look at, ISIS is there. They're gonna kill you. They're gonna, but, and I'm not saying that they're not. They're doing, and they're horrible and they're vicious. But again, where do they buy weapons from? Where do they get their finance? We all know. I mean, we all know how it works, and the fact that people are going around and around this topic is tiring, because we know what ISIS is. We know what ISIS, where ISIS comes from, who financed them, who trained them, who give them the weapons. I mean, all of this we know. I mean, it's not a secret anymore.
Can I ask you, I need to ask you, I'm trying to get my head around this. What parts of Syria does ISIS control at the moment, or is it all over Syria?
No, they're not. I mean, there isn't a specific location that they are controlling, but they are, as you said, they are here and there. And we, again, because the picture is very blurry in Syria. In northeast, there are the Kurds. In southwest, the Israelis are there. On the north, you've got the Turks. So no one really knows what is like, who is doing what and where. We get all these information from news like everybody else. I have some friends, Syrian friends living there. Sometimes they tell me what's going on, especially the ones who are from minorities. They now live in ghettos. They are scared of moving from one city to another in order to avoid checkpoints, because they don't want to be exposed on these checkpoints with being known through the ID card, the name or the religion, or so they live in these ghettos that they try as much as possible to minimize movement. Fear of ISIS, fear of other militias. It's not just ISIS. ISIS is part of the chaos in Syria. So again, as I said earlier, there hasn't been any guarantee by the US or the EU concerning minorities. They are left alone, to be quite honest.
Syria is, I think it's about 75% Muslim, maybe a little more, and about 10% are Christians. Now, you have Christian friends in Syria. Can you tell me which part of the country they live in, or if you wouldn't mind, and what are they witnessing at the moment?
What are they? What? I'm sorry.
Witnessing at the moment. What are they seeing at the moment?
All right. Well, as I said, on the surface it's quiet, but they every now and then they get harassed by so-called lawmakers, but they are militias here and there scattered. There has been reports about kidnappings, asking for ransoms, atrocities committed to certain minorities, especially Alawites, who are connected to the previous regime, since the Al-Assad is an Alawite himself. So it's very tricky. So that's why, as I said earlier, they are trying to minimize movements within the country because they don't want to be exposed. So that's why you have the Druze in the south and southwest who are trying to stick into that region. They don't want to go around because they don't want to be exposed. The same thing with Alawites, the same thing with Christians. And not only that, even Shia Muslims as well, and even Sunni Muslims who are opposing this government, they are being exposed to atrocities. So again, this government did not apply any of the demands that were risen back in 2011 about freedom of expressions, inclusivity, and diversity.
Do you think there'll be a religious cleansing, and that Christians may be exterminated in Syria?
I don't think that. I mean, I don't believe it's going to be like it's. Let me put it this way: it's not going to be a Holocaust.
We have a issue at the moment because we can't say where we're talking to him from, but sometimes intermittent hiccups with the internet signal. So we'll just wait for for Hani to get back to us, and he's just
Yes, can
connecting
you?
now to us. It's
Yeah.
an absolutely atrocious part of atrocious humanity or human catastrophe. That's what I'm looking for. So he still hasn't connected. What we might do is just go to a quick commercial break. If I
Yeah.
can just find one quickly. And oh no, we're back again, which is good.
Yes.
So you were
Yeah.
saying, Hardy, that you thought that there wouldn't be this mass slaughter of Christians. But can you just tell us? I mean, you mentioned you're sort of very kind about the atrocities and stuff. What are they subjected to, the Christians or those that aren't in favour of? And it would seem that with ISIS, nobody really is safe at all.
Well, here's the thing. Do we consider the present government as part of ISIS? I'm not sure, because all of a sudden, people in the government, whether Ahmad al-Shara or his ministers, basically they trimmed their beard and they're wearing suits. So is the ideology still there? I think so, but they are also afraid of international reactions. So they are trying to be balanced between what their stance internationally and what is happening on the ground. But the thing is, the problem is a lot of people who were connected to these Islamic or Islamist militias, they have grudge against minorities because they do believe that minorities were supporting Assad, which is not true. I mean, yes, a lot of them, they were supporting them, but a lot of them were not. Same goes to Sunni Muslims. A lot of the Sunni Muslims were supporting Assad, and a lot of them were against. So it's not a black and white. But as I said earlier, not just Christians, any minorities, what they think now of most of them, or at least the ones I know, that they are thinking of moving out, to immigrate, to go elsewhere, whether to neighboring countries such as Jordan or Lebanon, or to Europe. So, because again, there hasn't been any kind of guarantee given to these minorities by the government, and there should be some kind of pressure from the United States and the European Union on the government regarding minorities.
Are there slave markets, and where are the victims from, and who
I'm
buys?
sorry?
Are there slave markets? Where are the victims from, and who's buying the slaves?
Slave market? No, I'm not sure there is. I mean, we heard back I mean, that was probably during ISIS presence in Iraq, that there has been reports of enslaving Yazidis women. But that was back in 2015 in Iraq. In Syria is somehow different. But that doesn't mean that there has been reports on sexual abuses and sexual atrocities against communities there and against minorities. But I'm not sure it is to the level of enslaving. I mean, that's a big word. I'm not quite sure, and I cannot confirm it.
Okay. What about Israel's role in Syria? Are they increasing their territory?
Can you repeat again?
What about Israel's role in Syria? Are they
Oh,
increasing
yeah.
their territory?
Well, what the Israelis are claiming is that they are protecting their northern borders and northeastern borders, which is total nonsense, to be quite honest. It was an excuse for them to expand their territory. I mean, their politicians are not hiding it. They're showing maps of so-called Greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates, which includes part of Syria, parts of Jordan, parts of Egypt. So that was an opportunity for them to increase further. And that's why I mentioned earlier that Julani and his cabinet, they are complicit with the Israelis, because all of a sudden they did not fire a single bullet on Israelis while they are fighting other Syrians in the north and the northeast. So the Israelis took this opportunity, the change of regime, the chaos, to expand. They are taking an excuse that they are protecting minorities, they're protecting the Druze, which is just an excuse for them to expand. And they will expand even further. And indicators are showing that they will not stop there. They will go, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank, you cannot separate it from what is happening in south of Lebanon and the southwest of Syria. So the Israelis will expand as long as they are taking support from the US and different EU member states.
What about which countries have laid claim to oil, and does the US have an overt presence in Syria?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that correct.
What about the oil? Which countries have laid claim to oil, and does the US have an overt presence in Syria?
Yes, northeast Syria is a rich region of oil, and that's why where there has been a lot of clashes between the Syrian Kurds and the Syrian government. What I understood is that there is an American presence nearby the oil reserves there in order to protect the oil export trade from in and out of Syria. So yes, that's one of the reasons why there are clashes in that region, in that area, because it's rich in oil.
It's can you just tell me, because we are now running out of time, and we will open the invitation again to you, Hani. Tell me where you see Syria ending up, because you are very well informed and you know pretty precisely what's happening. Where do you see the future of Syria?
To be quite honest, it's very, very gloomy. What I see, how I see it is I want to compare it to Afghanistan in a way, even though it's not Afghanistan, different circumstances. But I want to compare in what happened back in the 80s when the US and Saudi Arabia supported Al Mujahideen to the point where Osama bin Laden was described as a freedom fighter, because back then he was fighting the Soviets. The same people, 10 years later, they were considered terrorists. So, and vice versa. So it's the same thing here. All of a sudden, these people who were considered as terrorists, now they are in government. They are good guys. I don't know how, and they are being dealt with as okay. This is the reality for people to accept. Now, what will happen? I'm not quite sure. I'm not optimistic. I would love to, but it's not looking good. You have all these fractions fighting. You don't have clear laws. You don't have a just constitution. I mean, reading at the constitution, what is supposed to be a constitution. It's a joke what is happening. There is no sovereignty in a way. I mean, Giuliani and his cabinet, they don't really control much of Syria. You have the Kurds in the northeast, the Turks in the north, the Russians in the west, the Israelis in the south. Syria is basically a battlefield for whoever wants to go in there. So you have regional and global powers in Syria. So I don't see Syria being a stable country for the next, let's say, 10 years at least.
They're very depressing, isn't it? Look,
Yes.
I have to thank you so much for your time. I know this took some work. I appreciate it. And the invitation is open, because we need to discuss this on a regular basis,
Yes.
and not just follow the line of legacy media and what our governments tell us We actually need to know the truth. Honey Doik, if you do you have any socials? I mean, it's a stupid question, by the way, but I want to ask you, or if somebody wants to find out more about the truth of what's happening in Syria, are there any other ways of finding out?
I would advise people to go into social media. There and bloggers, and there are some influencers or people on the ground who are not connected to news channels, not connected. That they are reporting from their neighborhoods, from the cities and villages. And there has been a lot of Syrians who basically courageously reporting about what is happening there. And of course, major media outlets, they do report, but unfortunately, major media outlets, everyone has their own agenda. And sometimes you get lost as a spectator. You get lost. It's like whom to believe. And in the wake of what happened in Gaza and now Syria, there has been a lot of reports from inside, from people who are living there, living their daily lives and reporting about what is happening. So I encourage people to do their research. There are tons of people on the internet who are reporting with their videos and interviews. And of course, some of them are misleading, but when you do your research here and there, you can have a better understanding of what is happening in Syria.
I appreciate your time, and thank you so much. Hani, he's also a humanitarian worker and truly a very remarkable person. And we'll do more of these conversations, because that's what we need to do, is talk about it. This is The World Today.
Surprisingly, the blueprint for transformation is woven into the United Nations Agenda 2030. Ostensibly, a vision for a better world.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I say again that taken together, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Climate Agreement provide humanity with a master plan for a sustainable way of life on this planet.
New York City, late September 2024. The setting for the United Nations Summit of the Future, a gathering of member nations to reinforce and accelerate Agenda 2030 and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The plan has a broad spectrum and is full of worthy ambition. But behind those deliberately bright and colourful boxes lies a darker theme, a shifting of influence and potentially power towards unelected world bodies. The strategy goes back well into the last century, and pressure is growing, because the goals are far behind targets set at the grand relaunching in 2015.
17 inspiring Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Our aim is clear, our mission is possible, and our destination is in our sight.
To end poverty and hunger, address inequality, protect our planet, and build a life of dignity for all.
It appears to be a noble and ambitious programme for a perfect world. And who could argue with those aspirations? But critics insist the goals are not what they seem. Alex Newman is a journalist and broadcaster who's been investigating the issue for 15 years. He has his own way of interpreting the rhetoric.
You have to learn to speak what I call UNEs. You have to know what the terms mean if you want to truly understand what is being discussed. When they talk about peacekeeping forces or the peacekeeping role of the United Nations, they're actually talking about the war-making capabilities of the United Nations. So you have this Orwellian doublespeak. When they talk about transparency, more often than not, they're talking about eliminating your privacy. Human rights is another very, very good example. They make very clear in this document that your rights can be restricted under the guise of public order or morality or whatever the case may be. And so they're saying, here's your rights, but by the way, they're not really rights. We can revoke them at any time. The UN is filled with contradictions like this. Like, for example, when they talk about gender equality, right? A normal person in the Western world thinks gender equality means a woman has a right to earn money, to own property, to have all the rights and privileges that a man would have. When you look at the individuals who lead this movement within the UN, you're talking about radical feminists. You're talking about people who are very interested in dissolving the nuclear family. As you dig into these goals, it's very clear we're dealing with something far more nefarious. Once you look past the marketing slogans, the kind of warm and fuzzy, we're going to end hunger, which again is just window dressing, you realize that this is actually a blank check for totalitarian global control.
Author and campaigner, the late Rosa Koire, called out the plan more than a decade ago.
It is the biggest public relations scam in the history of the world. But it's far more than that. It's a blueprint. It is the action plan to inventory and control all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all information, all energy, all means of production, and all human beings in the world.
Not the station for people who label truth as misinformation just because they don't like it.
For facts and truth.
Today's News Talk. The World Today.
And welcome back for our final leg on the world today. At 22.9 in the UK, 22.7 in Queensland and Cairns, which is part of Queensland, and 22.8 New South Wales and Victoria. Rada Sterling is a leading human rights advocate, crisis manager, and policy consultant focusing on the UAE and the wider Middle East. She's the founder and CEO of British-based organisation Detained in Dubai, which has helped almost 20,000 victims of injustice over the past 13 plus years. Due Process International and IPEX, which is Interpol and extradition reform. Rada also hosts the Gulf Injustice podcast. We're going to talk today about the recent dump of Epstein documents by the US administration. The volume of information dumped, that is, and that's the operative word, is extraordinary, as was the scale and shocking implications of this one man's legacy. What a legacy. Despite this, it's hard to believe that only one associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, is behind bars. Perhaps the fallout has begun, starting with Lord Mendelsohn, and it could bring down PM Starmer. Now, Europeans mentioned in the Epstein files are being fired or forced to resign. Poland and Lithuania opened an official investigation. So did North Macedonia. More European countries may follow in the upcoming days. As of today, the biggest kingpins behind Epstein's web of crime remain inoculated. First of all, Rada, thanks for joining us. We need to put the microphone on. We have no sound. And the look of panic it sets in. It's a terrible thing. No, we still can't hear. What I might do is just go to a very quick break and we'll try and fix this up. This, by the way, is The World Today.
Growing up, my father enjoyed a drink. It was just part of our culture. So you might have started drinking at 15 or 16, and so then it's just a slippery slope.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk.
Okay, we're back again. Rada, we have sound, I believe.
Excellent. That's what we need.
Excellent. I mean, isn't it intriguing? I mean, you're a British-based human rights advocate and all the good stuff, and you're in Cairns enjoying the beautiful weather. I'm sure that the good folk of the UK right now, at 18 away from 9, and I believe it's pelting down with rain in most parts of the UK. they'll be sending you really mean messages because you're enjoying a bit of rain, but it's magnificent up in Cairns. You've got the Whitsundays, you've got Port Douglas, and fantastic part of the world. Tell me about Epstein. What do you make of his of these documents?
It's so complex that it's almost, you have to ask, is there some sort of a further deep state, a shadow government, or this quid pro quo influence ring that's running so deep? I don't think we can even understand it from the document dump that we've seen so far. And I look forward to spending a good long amount of time trying to uncover what is happening here. What are the implications? I think, if we look at Keir Starmer potentially, so either having to resign or being forced out, it almost begs the question, well, why wasn't that the case before when we're talking about the rape gangs in the UK? This is just another extension of that. And then we start asking, is there any accountability? We have these rings of human trafficking, of the abuse of women, or some of them voluntary, some of them involuntary or coerced. And these are the people that we're entrusting to run our governments, to be in our House of Lords, to be in charge of huge, massive, influential companies that are working with our governments. I mean, we look at Bill Gates. I have to say, I was happy to see some consequences for Bill Gates, because I think he's been acting like God. I think he's been acting so immune, and the fact that they've been able to get away with a hell of a lot without ever being brought to account just emboldens further. And I hope that people, when they think of Bill Gates now, maybe they won't want his genetically engineered mosquitoes and his fake meat and whatever other product he's trying to sell our government and trying to get us to pay for through taxpayer money. So I hope that there's going to be some consequences beyond just exposure and accountability for those specific crimes. I hope it does have that ongoing impact and changes things, wakens people up. I hope we investigate what's been going on with this planned pandemic, which we all kind of know about now, but it would be good to see that truly investigated and for some genuine reports to come out, rather than future generations learning that it was this scandemic in 50 years, 60 years, 80 years. We want to know now.
The media, and it's a great distraction. When everybody has been like, oh wow, he was involved with some very, very grubby and probably highly illegal activities, but we don't know that just yet. But the redactions, they were thinking that it's to protect Mr. X and all these, for doing terrible things. I put it to you that maybe these redactions have been to protect others in much more serious crimes, such as crimes in partnerships with other countries. If you look at the Secrets Act, I'm sure Mandelson's going to receive a fairly hefty sentence because he shared secrets. And so I'm just thinking sure, it's great to, or not great, but it's convenient to throw up the sexual undertones and overtones, and Bill Gates, he also enjoyed one of those occurrences that he contracted a terrible disease, and the Russians did it. See, and
now there's an operation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we got him. But I'm just thinking, though, do you think that it goes much deeper than what we're seeing? And government's very good at doing that, create the distraction and look at what's bubbling on the surface, but you need to go down deep and have a look at what's happening below the surface. And that's where I think the alarming things will be. Forget about the personal things at this stage. Look at the dealings with foreign powers. Look at the Secrets Act of any country being busted. This guy had his finger in every pie. He had the ideal vehicle to get what he wanted. It's called blackmail.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you have ex-intelligence officers on the one hand saying it's probably not blackmail, because it would just so easily end the first time that you did any official blackmail, which I tend to think is probably accurate. But I think there's an underlying blackmail, isn't there? If you do something wrong and you know your friend knows about it, you know that at any time they could hold that over you in some way or another. They could expose you, they could report you. So yes, I think there's blackmail without even being overt about it. Like, it's just known, and you know that when you trust someone with a secret, that at any time in the future, if you have a falling out, that secret could get exposed. So it's sort of blackmail by default. But I think the big element here that needs to be looked at is the quid pro quo. The influence that they are going to get, the plans that they can come up with and implement, whether it's a globalist agenda, whether it's extracting money through a pandemic or through some other, climate change fiasco, climate change this or that, and just by deceiving the public. And I think that needs to be looked at, and absolutely the foreign influence, because I don't believe that it's just Russia and that we should focus on Russia as a demon here. It is going to be so wide. It's going to involve everyone from Israel to China to Russia, to anyone who has an interest. And that's pretty much all the world stage, all of our competitors in particular, and possibly even elements of the US government themselves, which I absolutely would expect to uncover if there was any sort of a possible deep dive without ramifications for people, because it's going to expose a lot. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to find out all of that information without true inquiries and open inquests. And I think that'll be difficult. We're going to have to rely on some deep diving journalists at this point, I'd say. And you're right that the sex element of it can just be a distraction, and we can't just focus on that. We need to see what kind of influence these people have had over the whole world, and what are the consequences for that have been. And there need to be lawsuits as we dig deeper. We need to be able to hold people to account in different ways, because I think through the discoveries as a result of these lawsuits, we'll find out a lot more than we will just through document dumps. And so far, there hasn't been a lot. From where these documents lead us, we would assume there would be a lot more. There'd be a lot more investigation. I'd say that, all of the different departments of the US are going to have bits and pieces of information, and we're not going to see them come together without some sort of a collaboration and an investigation in that way.
I've never seen so many redactions, some pages, for example, like this one. This was released. I mean, it's one of my mouse pads, but the point being, actually, more used too than those pages. But why would you release thousands of pages? I mean, by the way, I think there are about 3 million pages. So there are some great, or not great, but there are very important secrets or information is embedded in those documents, and many of those we can't see. Why do you think do you think it was just to protect the victims with all these redactions, or do you think it was more to protect the guilty?
I think it's potentially going to have to do with the redactions might be of high-profile people from other countries, and that's possibly can be covered under national security issues that can allow them to redact. I do not think it's just for victims. I mean, they released a lot of the victims' names, by the way, so I really don't think it's too much care for the victims at this point. I think it is to keep confidential some of the VIP names that would be on that list, some of the foreign governments, possibly diplomats, people that they want to protect and that they have an ongoing relationship with, I'd say, and that may have more information that they want to investigate.
Yeah, some of the names just recently, it's sending all the tabloids nuts, and even bringing the Russians into it, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. But we have Lord Mandelson, we have Tony Blair's been mentioned in the dispatches. Well, even Nigel Farage has been mentioned, of course, ex-Prince Andrew.
Yes.
I mean, and they're all calling for their blood. And by Kevin Rudd, I didn't do it. But Kevin Rudd mentioned it too. Epstein had this great, like an octopus. He was everywhere. His network was just fantastic for a networker. The amount of secrets, though, that he must have. What do you think will happen, for example, with the British government? Because we have Starmer. There was no due process when Mandelson became the ambassador to the US. Obviously, he had a few things in the closet that didn't come out until just recently with Epstein. Obviously the security background checks and stuff weren't all that secure or weren't all that good. Do you think this will impact the UK government to an extent that it may bring on maybe an election?
That's hopeful. I think that there should have been an election quite some time ago, to be fair, especially after all of the scandals that we've seen. I hope it does. And I think that people are fed up. I think that, people were so angry about these grooming gangs already. And then to add this, it's just so dirty. And it's just, it's like when during the pandemic, when they had all of their parties in Westminster, that was just tasteless. It left just such a terrible taste in people's mouths. And I think the same is happening here. And the Epstein, it's just too much. They're already unhappy with the economy, the climate in England. People are walking around miserable. They can't afford many things, and Labour's saying, well, we'll give you a little. We'll try to pass something to give you a little rent relief. Well, that's not good enough. That's not going to solve the economic problems. You've got so many wealthy people leaving the country. Now you throw this onto it as well. Like you're a sex scandalist. You're supporting and hiding and sheltering sex offenders, essentially, is the perception, whether it's true or not. Whether, the woman that Lord Mandelson was with was underage or not, it's irrelevant. It's scandalous. That image says too much to the British public. They don't want to see this man anywhere near as a convicted sex offender in his underwear. And with a woman with a redacted face, which obviously makes him look even more guilty, these redactions. So possibly that's it. But I think when you combine all of that people are generally unhappy with the climate in the UK, with the economy, with everything that's been, the lies that the British government has been, conducting. They're not telling us who's committing crimes, the demographics. They're not allowed to talk about it. We've got censorship. We've got people being thrown in prison over a tweet or a social media post. Now we've got these investigations in Congress in the US uncovering their attempts to censor true information. We've got them targeting Elon Musk and X. And then to couple it, now to top it all off, now we've got this, deep relationship with Epstein, with the House of Lords, and it's too much, I would say. And I think that Keir Starmer is at serious risk at this point, and he should be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you too. I can see on Craig's list or something like that, and ex-Prince Andrew will have room available for those caught. And so maybe Mandelson will be sharing the house. I mean, look at Fergie too. I mean,
he might need a large chateau, I'd say. House them all.
I shouldn't even say that. But if you look at COVID and those that were held accountable, I think it was about zero. Do you think these people, once caught having suffered the embarrassment, do you think they'll be held accountable?
It's really difficult, isn't it? I think that the public increasingly in America is fed up with the lack of account and really disheartened. And that's why it's been, I think, really important for the Trump administration to show that something's going to happen there. Whether it's Fauci, whether it's Bill Gates, people need to see something happen, I think, because it is depressing. And I think even more so in the UK, we're definitely not seeing accountability. We might see a resignation. That's about the extent of it. And, sometimes we don't even get an apology. So for this, their next move will be, how do we change the narrative? How do we change the talking points in the media as soon as possible? And that will happen. And people they don't have short memories that much anymore because it keeps coming up. We have access to the internet now, but it's like when the whole conversation moves on and the media supports that conversation moving on, then you have a problem. Then you have people just saying, well, okay, I guess we didn't get anywhere. And they'll have to consider that when they vote next, and that's very important. And I think, young men and people who typically don't vote as actively need to take that into account, need to understand that, inaction is apathy, and that's not something traditionally that men were. They fought for their freedom, they fought for their politics, for their religion, for everything. So, when you only have a small demographic who's willing to even go down and vote, and then you have people becoming sad and apathetic and all they're doing is protesting, they need to ensure that they take that fire and do actually take it to the voting office, and also speak to the media. Stop buying these papers that are covering up these kind of crimes and supporting the government to that. You've got to vote with your money as well. Don't support Netflix if you don't like their content. We really have to get a little bit more activist about what we want. And things do change. I mean, look at the US, you can see quite a lot of changes. There's no way we would have seen these millions of documents. And we might say there's probably more documents, but we never would have seen this, except that we demanded it. So we can see now we make demands and they do get met, but we have to be pretty aggressive when we push and lobby for them.
How do you think Trump will come out of this? I mean, he did release the documents. A lot of them redacted, so waste of paper. But he did release them. And there's could you imagine being an editor going through 3 million documents? Give me a break.
Yes. I think he'll come out of it fine. I think it's probably, I think he would have fought harder to redact and to not release them if there was a significant amount that is going to damage him. Most of it, the damage is going to be, I think, from just random headlines, and that's probably just from media that already hates him anyway. So the impact on his voter base might be quite small. There hasn't been any criminal allegation against him, so I don't really know. I mean, I know that obviously people are hoping that there will be something in there, but I don't think it would have been released if there were, because it'd possibly be a matter of national security at that point. Furthermore, I think he has a really good point when he says if there was something in there against me, if I'd committed some crime or I'd been involved in something nefarious, there is not a chance in hell that he wouldn't have been prosecuted for that already. And I 100% believe that. I think if there was anything, my biggest issue, I think, with the Epstein files is that anything that was of interest in there against certain Democrats was probably removed. Because that's the most likely scenario, as far as I'm concerned, is that sort of meddling. Because we saw a lot of criminality with covering up crimes, with just that boldness and just being confident enough to do things that you wouldn't expect that they would do. So, if anything, any really truly important files have probably already been taken, seized, and put in the intelligence agencies, and we'll never see them.
One wonders if that's an oxymoron, the intelligence agency. Sorry, I'm being quite rude. Rada, always a pleasure. Just quickly, what are you doing for the weekend? Just tease the people.
Well, I've been starting every day with a nice swim, sometimes in the rain, and enjoying the beautiful weather. And I'll have to put on the air conditioning, but I will be back in England very soon. So,
you poor thing. Oh well.
It's great talking to you.
I think the summers up in Cairns are magnificent. Bit of
They
rain,
are.
hurt anybody. They're lovely, and then a Chardonnay in the evening.
Well, that's a very good idea. It is Friday night.
Don't stop because of me. Rada Sterling, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Can just come on to radasterling.com.
That's pretty straightforward. Enjoy the tipple tonight, and it was lovely chatting. For those in the UK, well, Can't do much about it. Enjoy the rain. This has been The World Today and the protagonists earlier on. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be back again on Monday. We have some news coming up soon. We just have to get through a few more hoops, but we have some very good news, we think. Maybe next week we can announce it. This has been The World Today. Thank you very much.